Hello, my name is Kelly Rossouw and I'm ridiculously excited to be back with this super fun project. We're going to be creating this awesome fridge magnet, and it is an entire magnet sheet to be able to count down your holiday. There are going to be two versions available of this file for you to download. One that has the writing included, and I've left the writing off one of them just in case you want to add your own font. So make sure to check the link below to download that file, and included in this file are 4 different versions, 2 summer and 2 winter versions. Honestly, because I had far too much fun creating them. So if you enjoy this video, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on any awesome tutorials. And for this craft, we're going to get started with the materials that you're going to need. You're going to need a Cricut Joy Extra, or any one of the Explore or Maker machines. The only machine that can't handle this is the Cricut Joy. You will need a printer or access to a printer. And if you don't have a printer at home, don't worry, I will show you how to complete this tutorial even if you don't have a printer. Depending on the method that you choose to use, you may need a deep point blade. I prefer to use the full magnet sheet for mine, mostly because it's such an easy way of completing the tutorial, but if you are going to be sticking it onto something like a craft board, then you won't need a deep point blade, as you can just easily cut the craft board with your fine point blade. You will need some kind of printable vinyl. Now, this comes in many different kinds, and I prefer to use the glossy printable vinyl. This is different from normal premium vinyl. As a rule of thumb, if it doesn't say that it's specifically printable vinyl, you cannot print on it. So make sure to get some actual printable vinyl for this project, whichever one that you choose to use. You can use glossy, matte, holographic, doesn't matter. You can even use sticker paper for this as well. Another option is to use some laminating sheets. So this is just a nice fun holographic clear vinyl that goes on top of your printable vinyl to kind of seal it off, but you absolutely don't have to use this if you don't want to. You will also need magnet sheets or some kind of magnets. So because I'm not in the US, I use A4, but you can absolutely get letter sized magnet sheets. Or if you want to do many of these, you can get big rolls of magnet sheet and cut them down with a guillotine. It does work out quite cheap, but you do also get a printable magnet sheet that you can use. Just make sure that your printer can take the thickness of the magnet sheet before feeding it through. And then you won't need printable vinyl, but I prefer to go the printable vinyl route. I would also suggest having something like a chalkboard vinyl or a whiteboard vinyl to go onto your actual magnet. I have had some success on using whiteboard markers on normal Cricut Premium vinyl, so test it out with your whiteboard markers before using it, as we don't want it to mess up your project. And of course, if you're going to be using chalkboard vinyl, you'll need some chalk. And if you're using whiteboard vinyl, you'll need erasable whiteboard markers. You will need either a standard or a strong grip mat, again, depending on which method you choose to use. I prefer to use my strong grip mat when I'm working with my magnet sheets, as I find that it sticks much better. And of course, you're going to need the files down below, so make sure to download those and make sure that you stay tuned for a special offer at the end of the video. Once I've got all of those things together, when I'm working with Print Then Cut projects, I like to use a template. Now, the template I use is to make sure that I'm using up the most of my printable material, because we all know how expensive this stuff is. So that each time when you work with a Print Then Cut project, you can come back and use this to try and optimize the space as best you can with your Print Then Cut projects. With this design open, we're going to upload our design. So just follow the standard steps. Click upload, upload image, and you can choose whichever one you want to upload. So I'm going to choose the summer vacation one and click open. Apply and continue. Make sure to select Print Then Cut image so that it saves the actual image itself, and click upload. Now from here, we need to make sure that the sizing is correct. So I'm going to hover my mouse just on the outside of the white block so that the mouse arrow rounds out, and I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard and rotate it so that it is 90 degrees. I'm then going to click and drag on the little white square and reduce the size. And I'm going to move it onto my Print Then Cut template. Technically, we can just print this straight away, but what I like to do is I like to have a little bit of a white border around the edge. So if you want a white border, you can go ahead with the step. If you don't want a white border, you can skip this. So I'm going to click offset, and I'm going to toggle the offset distance to however wide I want it to be. So I think about a 0.18 or a 0.2 inch offset will work just fine, and I'm going to click apply. Now the offset will be black. If you don't want it to print black, you're going to need to change the color. So we're going to click on this little black box right up at the top left of our screen, and from there we can choose whatever color we want the offset to be. I want it to just be plain white, or you can even make it a light blue color. It really doesn't matter, it's totally up to you. But whatever color you set it on this screen will be the color that it will print. So if it's white, it won't print anything. If it's blue, it'll print as blue. From here, we need to make sure to select the 2 layers that we need for this project. So the 2 layers in the layers panel on the right hand side of your screen, you want to select the Print Then Cut layer, hold in Shift on your keyboard, and select the offset layer as well. The next step, you need to make sure to flatten both of those layers together. You cannot attach them. If you attach them, Cricut Design Space sees them as 2 separate elements and it will cut them out separately, which is not what we want. We want to flatten them into 1 layer. You'll see there's only 1 layer there. And now because we've added an offset that is a solid white offset, it will see it as 1 solid object and it'll only cut around the outside. Next, what I like to do with my Print Then Cut projects is make sure that I'm getting the most out of the space. So I'm going to move this design into the corner, making sure to not overlap any of the corners of this object. So the gray template at the back is where you can put your things on Print Then Cut. And make sure to not overlap anything, because otherwise it'll give you an error. So I'm going to zoom out and see how far I can push this design before my layer starts giving me an error. What we can see here is that my layer has a little exclamation mark in a red circle. That means that there's a problem with this layer. To see what the problem is, you can click on that exclamation mark and it'll tell you everything that you need to know. So it says here, your image is too large. So I've made it just a little bit too big. You can click on auto resize, but it will give you the size that you need to make your image in order to be able to print then cut using the letter format and what is compatible with that size. It'll also give you another error that says low resolution. Don't worry about the low resolution. This is a very high resolution image. It just seems to think that it's a low resolution image, but it actually prints out beautifully, as we can see here. So you can ignore the low resolution image warning. And we're going to then just make this a tiny little bit smaller, and we have now removed our little error message. Next, what I like to do is to hide the template layer. So this layer that we have here, like I said, it's just a template, a guide for us for when we're putting lots of little things and playing Cricut Tetris, which is what I like to call it. So I'm going to click the little I, and then that layer is gone. Now, in order to have the little section on your countdown where you can write on, it's really easy to add this in. We're going to click on shapes, and then you can add in honestly whatever shape you want. I'm going to be using the rounded off square, as that's the one that I like the most, but honestly you could use a car, a unicorn, a horse, a trumpet, whatever you want to have on there, as long as it's just like a solid outline that you want to draw on. So I'm going to click on the rounded off square, and I'm going to hover it over the design and make the size as big as I need it to be to fit on the inside of that little section here. And we can of course rotate it to see what it's going to look like. And I'm going to make mine a 3-inch square so as not to cover up too much of the design. Now luckily this isn't a project that we've done a ton of work on, so it's not the end of the world if we don't save it, but I like to save these projects regardless. So I'm going to click save and then change the name entirely. So this is going to be Vacation Countdown, and I'm going to save mine as letter format as I use A4, so I'm going to be using the A4 sizing. And then we're going to click save. I'm going to be using my Explore 3, so I need to make sure that my machine selection is set up correctly for the machine that I'm using. So I'm going to click on Explore 3 and I'm going to click make. Now this is printable vinyl, so we don't need to mirror anything. We need to just use it as is, and we don't need to change anything. The sizing is correct. We can just click continue. I'm then going to click Send to Printer. I'm using an Epson L3150. I like to leave the Add Bleed toggle on. And the reason why I do this is because if you've added a white border, it does nothing to your project. It will change absolutely nothing. If you haven't added a white border to your project, and your project is the edge of this design, then what it does is it adds a few extra pixels of color so that if your calibration isn't 100% correct, you won't have a white line where the cut hasn't quite exactly lined up. So I like to leave bleed on because it saves me just in case I forgot that I didn't add a white border. And that means that if my calibration, for whatever reason is slightly out, it won't actually mean that the project is going to look, So I like to leave it on. And I always toggle on the system dialog, personal preference, because I switch between materials a lot. Sometimes I'll use matte vinyl, sometimes I'll use glossy vinyl, sometimes I'll use matte paper, and I like to be able to custom tailor my settings on my printer for the material that I'm using. So I find it really important to have that on. And I'm then going to click Print. Now the printer dialog will pop up in front of your screen, just like that. If it doesn't pop up after a few seconds, minimize Cricut Design Space because it might be behind. Change your preferences on your printer to match whatever material you're going to be using. Like I said, I was recently using plain paper, so I now need to change this to photo paper glossy. I'm going to put the quality on high, and I always make sure that the high speed is turned off. I don't mind if it takes a little bit longer to print. I get better prints when I have the high speed setting off, which is under the More Options tab at the top. From there, I'm going to click OK. And once I have loaded everything, I've put the glossy paper into my printer, I'm going to hit print and print out my project. Now that my project is all printed, I'm going to select the base material that I'm going to cut. Please make sure that you have done your test cuts before you get to this section, so you know what cut setting to use on your material. I'm going to click Browse All Materials, and I'm going to search for magnet sheet. Now my magnet sheeting is about 0.5 millimeters or so I'm going to select the 0.5 millimeter magnet sheet setting. Now like I said, I've done my test cuts on this one, so I know what material setting I need to use. But either way, I would still recommend maybe taking a spare piece of the magnet sheeting and doing a test cut on your machine just to make sure that your cut setting is 100% correct before the project. And once you're done cutting your magnet sheet, we're going to go back into Design Space, and it will now be set on the second mat. And then we're going to just change the cut setting to whatever it is that you want to cut. So as an example, we're going to be cutting just normal premium outdoor vinyl. So I'm just going to select premium outdoor vinyl. It's as simple as that. So we now have the three objects that we're going to be working with. We have our magnet sheet, we have our printable vinyl, and we have our laminate sheet as well. You can do this in one of two ways. You can either apply the laminate sheet first, or you can apply the printable vinyl first. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to be applying the printable vinyl to the magnet sheet first. So all I like to do here is to pull up a corner of the sheet and line it up mostly with my magnet sheet. Now you don't have to line it up 100%. You can have the printable vinyl overlapping a little bit. So even if your magnet sheet is a little bit smaller, as long as it covers the entire section of your actual design, it should be fine. But mine is pretty much almost exactly A4, so I'm just going to line it up in the corner, lift up my printable sheet, and pull the backing off a little bit. Now what I want to do is I want to make sure that it lines up here as well as I can have it, and then I'm going to stop there for a moment. This is where I like to use a scraper that has a felt backing on it. Now this is just felt with double-sided tape on, so it's just stuck onto my scraper. And what I like to do is take my scraper and make sure that I get all of the bubbles out and go very slowly, just like you would laminate, school books with DC Fix or any kind of laminating sheet. And we're going to do this again when we get to the laminating sheet as well. Now you just want to carry on going. Don't press too hard and don't go too quickly. You want to go in like small sections, do little bits at a time so that you're making sure that you're not getting any bubbles. And once you get to the end, you can kind of just let that section pop off just like that. And like I said, it doesn't matter if the printable vinyl hangs off the edge of the laminate, because you don't need that little section. As long as this part has the magnet covering it, then you are 100% golden. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to cover our design with our laminate sheet. Now this is where we will need a pair of scissors, because when it comes to using the laminate sheet, I don't like to have the laminate sheet covering the registration marks, as it can cause some problems. So typically what I like to do is to hold the laminate sheet over the design, cut on the registration marks so that I have the actual size of the sheet. And you can absolutely do this with a guillotine if you want as well. And then because the laminate is kind of going to be overlapping these just a tiny little bit, what I like to do is just kind of chop off the edges. We don't need the laminate sheet in that exact section. So there you can see our lamination sheet covers the entire design, but it doesn't cover any of the registration marks. So now we pretty much follow the same protocol as what we did for the first one. We're going to lift up. If you're worried about it misaligning, you can align it and then use some painter's tape to lightly secure your lamination sheet while you work. So we can line that up, remove the backing. And TechWrap have a lot of amazing lamination sheets, just like this one. So if you want to get some, I would highly recommend checking those out. So now we're going to fold this back, lay the lamination sheet down, and then again use my scraper to make sure that I'm getting my lamination sheet cleanly onto my page. Now I'm going to take off my painter's tape and do exactly the same process as what we did for the first one. So I'm going to flip the page back and use my scraper to slowly pull the sheet back and get out any bubbles that might be on my sheet. I would recommend going slowly with this, because the quicker you tend to go, the more bubbles you tend to get, or at least that's what I find. And once your lamination is done, we're going to whip out our strong grip mat and remove the covering. Make sure to place your design down on your mat in the same orientation that you printed it, because we don't want to have that we put it down facing the other way and the writing is actually on that side. So just double check once it's on the mat that it matches what's in Cricut Design Space. If you have a brayer, make sure to use it so that it sticks your magnet down onto your mat. Use some painter's tape if necessary to keep everything stuck down. I'd rather use it and not need it than need it and I didn't use it. Make sure to not cover your registration marks. And then we're going to load it into my Explore 3, making sure that we have our deep point blade loaded if you're going to be printing it onto the magnet sheet. If you're not sticking it onto the magnet sheet, then don't stress. You can use whatever setting that you have found works for you. So we're going to load it into the machine. And once it's done its thing, we're going to press go. Now it's going to read over the registration marks, as you can see, just trying to figure out where they are. And what it'll do then, and once this little sensor has read all the registration marks and it figures that it knows where it is, it's going to start cutting. I would always recommend watching it cut, especially in the beginning if you aren't quite sure, because now you can see where the line is. So if it's not cutting in the correct place, then you can stop it immediately and save the rest of your media. That's kind of the biggest tip that I can give you. And because this is magnet sheet, it needs to cut several times, so it's going to do 4 passes before it's cut through the magnet sheet. make sure that it has cut through. So if you lift up the bottom of the material, you can see that it has cut all the way through. And that's kind of how I like to know before I unload my material. And remove our design from the mat. So we flip the mat over, curl the mat away. Now some of these laminate sheets can also work with whiteboard markers, so depending on the whiteboard marker you have, you might actually be able to write on these and then still erase them afterwards. But because it's kind of a darkish color, it might not stand out so well unless you have a whiteboard marker. So once you've cut your permanent vinyl or your whiteboard vinyl, whichever one that you've chosen to use, you can literally just peel it up from the sheet and stick it down onto your page. And from there, you can take your whiteboard marker and write down the days that you need to use. And then when you need to change the next day, you can just take your whiteboard marker eraser, erase out the number, and do the next one. All of the information that I've shared here helping you create these awesome vacation countdown magnets is included in my Print Then Cut Jumpstart workbook. From different kinds of vinyls to use, which Cricut you need to use on which material, because yes, that actually does matter. The best kind of printer to use, how to calibrate your machine, how to set up your Print Then Cut, as well as many different kinds of Print Then Cut project ideas, and other features to use with your Print Then Cut, and so much more. This is a very robust workbook, and it is completely jam-packed with information, tips and tricks, things that I've learned the hard way that you don't have to, and all for only $19. It is so worth it to have printable elements next to you that you can page through and you don't have to keep referring back to videos all the time. I find it helps me so much. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, be kind to someone today. See you soon.